Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of What If Civilization Started Over. In the last episode, we saw a few events happening, such as the finally end of the Tibetan Revolution, the Siberian Revolution continued on, and probably the biggest event in the entire series so far, World War II has finally begun. The sides are the Triangle Alliance, which is, being honest, the larger side. However, of the three alliances, the weaker, or of the two big alliances, the weaker of the two. However, it's just so much more widespread. The other alliance, however, is the Square Alliance, which also has the Cross Alliance on their team. They're probably one of the stronger alliances, or the Cross Alliance is the stronger alliance. However, they have less nations, and I mean, they're still a bit widespread, but not as much as the Triangle team. However, actually, the Cross Alliance does have members on every continent, just way less. But let's get into this video. Alright, so we're going to be coming up here to start as we see the Siberian Revolution has started to finally slow down. And by slow down, it eventually has come to a complete stop, and the Russians begin to start pushing back. So let me just use the regular Russian color for this. So I did do something here where I have separated the colors of all of the different parts of the Siberian Revolution. Most of them is just the color of invasion. It's like for the Lake Baikal Nation, it was the color invasion. Same with these guys. For Siberia, it was the actual color, and I used the color of invasion down here. And then these two, I just found some random colors that are similar. Mainly just making this color brighter by adjusting these two. Alright. But we see Russia pushing back against the Siberian Revolution, meeting up with the war of the Gold Country. And we're going to be splitting World War II into two separate parts because I'm going to say this. I did record this video once already. The map did not save, but yeah. So I do know I was not even halfway through World War II. I did talk about the Siberian Revolution, and I was already like almost a 40-minute video. Of course, I did have some editing stuff I didn't end up doing, but alright. So now let's actually get into World War II. Starting off in North America, we see the South Chinese make the first invasion, and theirs goes quite well at first. They're able to push deep into the pink country. However, down in the south, as South China does have less, uh, oops, as South China does have less military out here than the North American forces, they are they are pushed back slightly, recapturing two major cities and almost recapturing the third. However, where the Triangle Alliance definitely sees some success is up here, as especially with the Michigan team or the Great Lakes Empire, they have taken over very quickly the mainland part of Canada that the Purple Team controls. Soon after, them, as well as some American troops, will roll in through here, taking over this peninsula and all of the nearby islands, as the final part to this falls over very quickly to the. I guess these guys are more Quebec. So now there's only one front line already in America. However, down south, things are much different. Well, they're kind of different. South China is able to push into this blue Peruvian nation. They don't get very far because, once again, they don't have a whole lot of military out here, but they are sending so much of their military out to their colonies, especially from this colony. So they honestly thought that these guys were going to join the war, but these guys have declared that they're going to remain neutral. Same with the blue team and this yellow team down here. So Australia will be the only, or Oceania really, as a whole, is going to be the only continent we do not see any fighting on, unless, of course, you consider the Indonesian area a pure part of Oceania. Africa, however, is the actual only continent there will not be any fighting on at all. So we move back, or so we move on to Europe. And this is definitely, there's actually only two front lines, maybe three, but this is more really all one big front line. But it starts off still not going good at all for the Triangle Alliance as Germany pushes in, capturing over four major cities quite quickly. And as you can see, they've almost reached the capital. The same is also said as for the Adriatic nation, as they also capture four major cities. And then, lastly, the Great Empire begins to roll in, as they also capture four major cities and the rest of the country. As these guys, despite being the 16th strongest country, mainly due to their aid from Russia, they are surrounded by the 14th, 15th, or maybe those are backwards, or no, 14th and 13th, as well as the first strongest countries. But with most of Russia's forces just kind of focusing out here, the Great Empire will send their forces in through here, capturing over four major cities once again. Seems countries like to capture over four major cities. The South Chinese had four up there initially. Right here, they did only capture two. But we're going to come back down to South America real quick, as one country has made a quite fatal error. Catalonia has decided to completely move their military out of South America and out of Africa as well. That one less fatal. But they have moved it also from most of Europe, but all of their or all of their colonial army being in Catalonia, or being in Africa, South America, and again in Africa, and they have moved it over, and they are sending their aid up to the Great Empire, and some of it also into Ethiopia, as Ethiopia will attempt invasions into the RPGAU, but that is on Asia. So, um, but most of Catalonia's European forces go into the Adriatic Union and Germany, as well as some into Denmark. However, not a whole lot go into Denmark. So, we see the first Nordic frontline breakout, or finally breakout, as Norway takes over Denmark's Norwegian colony. However, this is soon followed. Sorry, or excuse me. This is soon followed by Germany sending its forces up into Sweden. However, a lot of their forces are more so down here, fighting into Russia. So it's mostly Denmark that's kind of going into here. But there, if you look at the technology map, which isn't actually fully updated, despite me actually just updating the stability map before recording. Well, the Danish, they don't have the best technology, as looking on this map, but in the more updated map, they have equivalent technology with what would seem to be these guys. However, that's not true at all, and there probably should be even more, I should say. There probably should be even more leeway in this, but it is what it is. Alright, so now we move over into more of Asia, and let's go down to Ethiopia as we didn't mention them earlier. The Cyan team will allow them to use these two colonies as well as this island to stage multiple attacks through the country, taking over five or six major cities, and up in the north, the Great Empire is able to do quite the same as they push in from the north, have seeing more success in the Mesopotamian areas as well as down in the south. However, they do see some success in Persia, despite not being despite Tibet not being entirely too friendly with them. There's a lot of Tibetans. They they don't like the RPGAU for sure. They also aren't fans of the Great Empire, but they also still like South China and Korea. It's a weird mess. But we move into the gold team up here as it seems almost everyone forgot about them as they're able to firstly take out the revolution up here, secondly, invade into the Great Empire, thirdly, invade into Lake Baikal, more in the northern areas, and thirdly, get invaded by South China. Yeah, South China didn't forget about them though. And turns out Lake Baikal didn't either. They had South Chinese troops staged up all in here, so Lake Baikal could spend its forces fighting against internal issues. And then we see, did I do that last episode? Okay, if I don't know if I did it or not in the last episode, but this major city right here was it's or there was a terrorist attack here, and then that spread out through multiple other major cities under the new control or under Siberian control. And now everyone's starting to hate them. And the people of Siberia start to mobilize themselves even without the government actually doing anything. And this starts to get really messy. And this becomes the bloodiest war ever fought. Not, well, World War II and this Siberian Civil War are different wars. Almost the entire world now is working together with it or again to fight against this, especially now that they're doing terrorist attacks. But World War II, one, it just broke out, whereas this has been going on for a few years at this point. Not as long as the Tibetan Civil War, but it's still quite a while. Alright, but we see, or next up, we go down a bit south, as South China. They haven't really invaded China yet, but they're definitely making their way through Vietnam as they have just taken over the whole thing. And they have also taken over most of Cambodia, just the peninsula that their capital lay on remain. But we see our first new entrance into this war. Going on to the alliance layer, this country will be joining the Triangle Alliance, and there's actually quite a lot of them. So I'm just going to go through them all while being on the right layer because I was not on the right layer while recording the first video. Alright, so firstly, we see this Bangladesh country. Second is India. Third is Pakistan. Fourth ends up, actually, we see the Siberian Revolution only, however, the parts that are in, I'm gonna put it right here, but it's only the parts that are in Lake Baikal and these regular Siberians. However, eventually it could spread to the ones that are fighting in Russia. However, that's not really, that doesn't look like it, that doesn't seem like it would work out. So I'm gonna move that down there, and we move, whoops, yeah, and we move elsewhere to see more countries joining. First of which is Green Mexico, followed by Red Mexico, and probably one of the more like you wouldn't think they would countries, but the three tribes also joined. And then for our final nation, which is actually going to be the most significant player added, or one of the most significant, is the Orange Ghana nation. So now that these countries have been added, it's time to remove countries from the alliances. The blue team, this weird color, or these two weird color countries, all three of them leave the Cross Alliance. They do not join the Triangle Alliance, but they do not want to be part of World War II, especially seeing as first and only frontline in Africa has just broken out near them. There should be a cross right here. But alright. So let's go into this war. North France is kind of, they didn't put any stuff into or they didn't put any military into their colony because there was originally no fighting, and just in case they had a backbone up here. But now Catalonia has moved all of their forces out, and their forces are already out fighting, and quite far away at this point too. So North France did the exact same. So this Guinea nation is able to have as much fun as they want to invading these colonies. It was definitely not the same to, or definitely was not the exact same or even close to the same in World War One, where it was very back, or for the most part, it was quite back and forth. But in here, we see it's just a lot of taking over land. As they do get closer to Catalonia, though, they start slowing down as more and more forces or Catalonian forces are starting to fully realize what's going on. But we see a new player enter the war. Well, not one, but two new players enter the war. The first being the Dark Sign team, as they begin invading up into Galicia. Like no one really expected these two especially to join. So they're two weak nations with two top 20 powers next to them, with 11th and 4th place. But both of these guys have their troops out fighting elsewhere. So maybe you can get West France or the Adriatic Union to supply you. Germany and Denmark, probably not, though. And then we see once more another country joins the war on the side of the Triangle Alliance. But they don't really join the war. More so, they come back from the dead ish. They already came back, but Italy and all of its provinces will join, or all of it, um, these things that I can't remember. All of the puppet state owned areas begin full on revolting from the country that owns them, and eventually Italy has fully returned, and their first action is unionizing with these guys up here. Because for whatever reason they thought that was going to be a good idea. Inspired, pretty much inspired by their worst enemy, The Swiss also will do the exact same thing, coming back. However, one, this is going to be harder to do, just because of all the borders. So now the Swiss have also came back. This is all gonna look real messy to start. But alright. So the Swiss have came back now. And their first plan of action is unionizing with these guys, of course. But neither country will join either alliance first, but they will definitely work with the Triangle Alliance, hoping to regain control over Europe. These two were once some of the strongest countries. They were, I think Switzerland was at one point the strongest, but that definitely changed as soon as the Great Empire entered. Actually, I think Blue Anatolia was always stronger than Switzerland. So, but with all these new small players that have become suddenly major in Europe, and especially with these the original Italian lime green color, uh, these guys, uh, no one expected them especially to join the war against these guys because they were allied with the Cross Alliance. So we see for our next event we see happening is Gibraltar's invasion. They definitely want some land reclamation in Africa, especially. So they had this great big colony that was like all of this. But the whole point of the Triangle Alliance is anti-colonialism. And you know what all of these countries that are now joining are in Europe? They're all colony. Or they were all colonial countries. They're not colonies. That's for sure. But still, they decide they're going to set aside their past in order to invade, in order to get revenge on those who betrayed them. And we see that prove very, very useful until it doesn't. Because the one reason that uh, West France, Catalonia, Germany, and the Adriatic Union swept through four countries in the middle of Europe was these guys right here. And you know what these guys right here are? The number one power in the world. It's by a long shot. Number two is actually the South Chinese Union, and number three would probably actually at this point be Russia. Number four could be the RPGAU, and Catalonia would had fallen to number five. I'm only gonna say this is top five, but I'm gonna do power rankings after World War II. Don't worry. But once the Great Empire starts redirecting its forces, we see two events happening. Firstly, Italy's almost, or they're not completely kicked out of the Adriatic Union, but they're decently pushed back. However, out here, we see that a bit less happening. However, the second thing we see happening is Russia starts pushing back against the Great Empire. However, out here there is a bit more force just because German troops are stationed right there. The RPGAU is just fumbling everything up until now. So remember, they had two revolutions, but seeing as the Great Empire, the country who helps them probably the most in their recent war, Ethiopia will decide this is the perfect time to go as fast as they can through the nation, pretty much blitzkrieging, except not the bombing everything part ish. They still do a bit of that, but they've already captured the capital. So now the RPGAU is definitely going to fumble as even the few troops stationed up here, it's not the few, but there's still there's more troops on the RPGAU side, but just because of them just completely collapsing, plus there's rebellions now down here, so like troops on the side of the RPGAU can't even get back down here, and even some parts out here are still kind of rebellious. So they let the Great Empire kind of go through here. But now we come back over to East Asia as firstly since Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, aka the Indian subcontinent countries, that's I might call them that, the Indian subcontinent trio. Um, they have figured out something kind of actually pretty bad if you like the Great or if you like the South Chinese Union. But what they found out is capturing this capital, one, it was not too it was not too hard. Two, it was probably the best thing they could have that has happened for the Triangle Alliance in this entire war. So you know what that does? That completely gets rid of all of the government and behind this line. And once realizing this, this South China now knows. Okay, so they've just found the one weakness to our best plan. So now this capital here, it governs this. So if they get rid of that one capital, then that all falls. If they get rid of this capital, that all falls. This capital up here, pretty much all of this has just fallen back here. Getting rid of this capital gets rid of all this. Getting rid of the Filipino capital gets rid of all of that. And the colonies don't really have capitals, but that's okay because they have backup plans. So now, they've just figured out the one way to beat the South Chinese, and they definitely use this against them. As quite quickly, suddenly this brown country up here seems extremely strong as they push all of South China back into Lake Baikal. And as Lake Baikal is starting to struggle internally, especially with the Siberian Revolution going on, they're not only invaded by the gold team, but again, but one, I got, or, but once again, by a country who's not really too fond of these guys. You could say they're number one hater. I mean, these guys just hate on everyone in the Square Alliance, except for the Siberians. That's the only Square Alliance member they're chill with. But these guys will then begin to invade south as well, into South China, and a quite old country at this point will decide to make a return. Go back all the way to this one episode, and if you know anything about this one episode, it's when the biggest war before World War One broke out, right out here in China, in the country that started it, Central China, as the Central Chinese rebel in this one capital that would make an entire region collapse. The South Chinese come back once again, or not once again, but the South Chinese make an appearance, announce themselves to the world, and still hate the Chinese. Yet, after all of these years of being in South China, their hate has only grown towards each other. However, these guys are more on the side of the Triangle Alliance. They had a colony down here, but a lot of people were never really fully into the idea of colonizing stuff. So it's not too hard for these people to rebel a lot, or for the rebellion to gain traction. But now we see another major thing happening again with the Indian subcontinent because all of these guys are going to be major players. Well, most of them. India will make a naval landing right here. Well, firstly, they make one right there, and then one's made right here and in there as well. But this is significant. Why? Because now South China has pretty much just accidentally cut themselves off from all of this down here, allowing for Sumatra to run in and grab it all. And then they also move up into the Philippine Islands, taking over all of this, once capturing this capital, leading to all of this falling. And the South Chinese will take over Taiwan. However, this was not their original territory. They'll invade into Taiwan. Then they start moving south, because nobody could have prepared for the South or for the Central Chinese to rebel, and South China is completely collapsing. And you know what happens next after they're collapsing? Well, firstly this, then then we see this start happening, and then we go back here real quick. We see the Vietnamese come back as well. And now that these two have returned, guess what's next? Yep, more rebellions. Myanmar, oops, Myanmar will reemerge as well, declaring their independence once again, and even a new face will show itself, being a let me find let me find a North country. These guys are never gonna return. I'm just gonna say that now. If you liked that country, I mean, first off, why? I'll find a different country. I'm gonna use the Sri Lankan color. Not neither of those countries are gonna come back. I mean, this country may disappear and then they come back. All right. So now this Sri Lankan colored nation appears, and they take over a decent amount of land too. And already the Square team has already lost probably their biggest player, because without this, they can't control this or this. But you know who can take control of this? The rightful owners. And that doesn't work well very, very quickly. Because these guys say, oh, we're on the side of the Triangle Alliance. And then they have a colony, so they decide to release that colony. Because what else is there to do? Everyone's gonna invade you right after if you don't. So, might as well do it now while you still have the chance. And pretty much right after almost fully collapsing, you know what South China does? Firstly, they give back this colony because, let's be honest, that's a smart thing. I mean, it's not like the country that rightly owns this territory is already collapsing too. So, that leads to another collapse happening internally, and it seems a lot of countries like to collapse in world wars. Well, as at least in this world war, every country, the name of every country that is collapsing internally: RPGAU, South China, regular China, even Siberia, the Lake Baikal nation, even Russia a little bit, especially the Prague nation, Catalonia, even a bit in Germany. We see it happening. Let's see who else. Who else could be collapsing internally? A bit in West France. Okay. Why did I do that? Oh well, I got off track. All right, but let's wrap this up with one final part to this episode, and that is bam, bam, down here, and then well, actually, what happens is bam. South China will release their colonies to be on their own, funding their own government and everything. There's nothing that these guys can do to stop this. This just becomes suddenly unclaimed lands, And that will do it for today's episode of What If Civilization Started Over. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.